Welcome to Probate Weekly. I'm Bill Gross at Bill Gross Probate, at Bill Gross Probate on social media. Really excited today to have an episode with somebody who's really special to me. He's the first attorney I had that was outside the state of California that I was able to interview from my second state, Florida, where I lived and married my wife, and I fantasized about moving back to. And he's also somebody who we saw kind of go from, I believe at the time, working for, I think, a school and or another firm to launching his own law firm, Jamy Barreau, out of the Sunshine State of Florida. Jimmy, thanks for joining us again on Probate Weekly.
Thank you for having me again. Happy to be here.
Now, I'm a Californian, so to me, the whole West Side's all the same of Florida, but I know you're in Port St. Lucie. Describe for people, because we do have attorneys and realtors across the country. Where's Port St. Lucie? What area do you service as an attorney?
Well, Port St. Lucie's on the east side of Florida, and I am I do service the entire state of Florida, right? So although if you could imagine, I work with my clients here typically, face to face, but for the most part, the firm is built out structured so that I can work with folks remotely. Um, in fact, since we last spoke, we've expanded, right? So now we've expanded into DC and Minnesota, and we do have
Oh,
virtual offices in those states as well. So I'm
oh.
happy to continue on helping clients remotely.
And do you find that you get ancillary estate business in those states, or are they people who, you're the primary estate plan? How did you end up in, of all places, Washington, D.C. and Minnesota, which I know are very active probate markets? How did you end up in those two spots?
Oh well, DC had been a long dream to be licensed in DC, and I was grateful to be able to have that done. Coming from parents who are immigrants, being able to set up some sort of foundation in our nation's capital was really big for me. In Minnesota, I kind of stumbled into that, right? It was interesting because I teach remotely up there at a community college in a paralegal program.
Right. That's right.
And first night of class, it was great. I was introducing myself, and a student stopped me. She goes, "Professor, wait, um, you're not licensed here?" I said, "Well, no." Well, she says, "Well, do you know what you're talking about?" And so
Fair
I said,
question.
"Well, it's a fair question." So I basically told her, "Well, yes, I do. Don't worry. I understand the basic concepts of what we're discussing in our class." But then it got me thinking, right? Well, how difficult is it for me to get licensed in Minnesota, and could it help me build rapport with my students and broaden my horizons with my business? And I said, you know what, let's go for it. And finally got licensed last year in January. Just
Wow.
celebrated my 1 year anniversary there, and
Wow.
opened up a remote office. So it's been smooth sailing.
So most people watch my program are real estate agents, investors across the country, attorneys looking for attorneys in other areas to meet. And one of the things I talk about is if you're going to do business with somebody, you want to do business with a specialist, with an attorney or a realtor in that particular niche, whether it be in real estate geography or practice, and with attorneys for sure in practice. And I know when I go to your website, to me, it just reeks of the kind of attorney that I would feel comfortable doing business with in probate or estate planning. When I go to your practice areas, it doesn't say DUI, it doesn't say incorporation, it doesn't say family law. I know there is some overlap in family law by nature in probate court. But you show your practice areas, estate planning and probate administration, which I call avoiding probate and, oh my gosh, you're in probate. And then trust administration, Medicaid planning, which is probably part of estate planning, or you didn't estate plan. VA benefit planning, again, estate planning, avoiding probate, and special needs planning. And so really, these are really kind of, I would say, niches or tools in the toolbox of what I would call the two main pillars for somebody who specializes in this area. And for those watching, again, I always look at the website. Now, of course, anybody can get the website. You have to also have the experience, and I know Jamie specializes. So let's talk a little bit. How is it you came to specialize of all the areas of law, criminal law, commercial law, family law? How is it you ended up in the estate planning and probate related fields?
Well, I always say I lucked out, right? So out of law school, I had the pleasure of working for a firm in my hometown, and I got exposed to a wide range of different types of law, right? So, of course, trust and estates, commercial litigation, contract drafting, negotiation. And so I got a taste of a lot of different fields. But what I learned was as I continued my practice and touched on different areas, I realized not only is my skill set best suited for trust and estates, but I really do love it, right?
Mm.
And so once I realized that, I said, you know what, this is where I want to be. This is what I'd like to do. And I focused solely on that, right? I went back to law school to get my master's in taxation with a focus in estate planning because I knew
Wow.
myself
Wow.
that if I wanted to really specialize and focus, that was probably the best avenue for me to get started.
And for those of you listening, I talk to realtors and attorneys who do the opposite of what Jamy did, which is they want business in an area, so they go to some marketing company and pay for ads and get some leads there and kind of learn on the job. And the thing I really admire about Jamy is he's always led with education and the knowledge so that people who come to him are going to, I think, get the best. So let's talk a little bit about your practice. I know that you deal with a wide range of customers or clients. What would you say is the most common avatar of client that you deal with in your practice today?
Well, it's really interesting because here I am in Port St. Lucie. It's my hometown, grew up, and I always knew it to be stereotypically, what you would envision a Florida town to look like, right? Maybe older folks who needed their end of life planning. But what's interesting is, and I don't know why or how, but it turns out the majority of my clients are younger, around my age, starting off their either their careers or their businesses, their families, and they just want to make sure they have um, something in place. Now, don't get me wrong, we have a wide range of clients from high net worth to more, uh, low, I don't want to say lower income, but more moderate wealth, right? Um, Middle class, rather, I should say. Old, young, but I do see that, the younger generation is gravitating towards our firm a little more.
Well, I do think that, ultimately people do business with people they trust and like, and they're more like us. And it's just a natural that people will, you know, congregate like us, who are more like us, whatever that means to them, not to us, but it means to them. I think they're going to congregate to us. So let's talk about specifically estate planning for now. What's a typical estate plan? Meaning, I know there are, kind of cookie cutter download options online. And I know there are attorneys that provide that for clients as a way as an entry level, and some don't like that. And there's more sophisticated. What's the most common kind of estate plan that you deal with in your practice today?
That's a great question. And really, I tell folks all the time, right? We have all these strategies, but really it's going to come down to, what you need and what's best for you, right? Because, a lot of us, we can kind of have that type of cookie cutter, like you were touching on, and say like, yes, everybody should have a trust. Not necessarily, right? So I think a lot. What I'll say is, the majority of my clients, their main goal is to make sure that they avoid probate, right? How do we do that? That's another story, right? Um, but I will say we do a lot of trust-based planning simply because, part of it is, I have an affinity for it, right? I think it comes with so many benefits. It checks a lot of boxes, but again, it has to make sense for the individual, for the
Right.
family. And if
Right.
it doesn't, then I wouldn't feel right. I wouldn't be able to sleep at night if I, sold them on something that could be, more costly when we can take care of their needs and goals just as efficiently in another way.
Now, for those of you who are watching, maybe from California, where I'm from, and I think the largest segment of my watchers, the principles are the same in multiple states. There's differences. And if you listen carefully to what you said, really estate planning, a lot of estate planning is just avoiding probate. So there's probate you didn't avoid, and there's a probate that you do avoid by proper estate planning. And for most of us, that's about as far as we have to go. Jimmy, I would say in California, anybody who owns a house, now there was a recent law that changed it, and we can debate on that at some other point. But a house maybe being $500,000 or more in California is well served having at least some kind of estate plan with some kind of a trust to avoid probate, just because probate is by its nature so much more costly and administrative. I know Florida's different, more efficient. less footprint as far as the government, or less heavy-handed. So how do you advise people? What's kind of the threshold that somebody should be planning? Of course, they should call and talk to an attorney and get their own individual. But as a general rule, where do you see the threshold for somebody who should have an estate plan?
Well, personally, I don't think I don't like to envision things in terms of thresholds with trust-based planning, right? Of course, it depends on what your goals are, right? If somebody came to me and said, "Hey, I want this house to stay in this trust for generations to come," well, okay,
Mm,
we might want to make sure we at least plan out some reasonable seed money in that trust for that goal. But other than that, I don't necessarily focus on, what base level we need to have a trust. Um, More so, I look more so at the goal at hand, right? And that's kind of what guides the strategy for me, right? And so if we have, let's say, a lot of conditions we want to put on this gift of this real estate, well, perhaps we need to look at a trust. Whereas here in Florida, we have a great tool called an enhanced life estate deed, a ladybird deed. That we can accomplish the goal from getting the property from point A to point B efficiently. Um, and so it really just comes down to the goal, at least in my view.
mhm. Now, part of estate planning in California is not just even the property or wealth, but it's also the medical and the financial powers of attorney, both pre-death and post. Um, how important is that in Florida by comparison?
I would say it's invaluable, right? Especially if you have somebody who you want to make these decisions that aren't, your typical person, right? So typically, and by that I mean perhaps, traditionally we would want our spouse to be that decision maker, and that might be a little easier, from the financial standpoint. If the spouse is, a joint on an account, great. If I don't know any healthcare provider that's going to turn a spouse away from giving them healthcare information and allowing them to make healthcare choices. But then the question really becomes, who's next, right? What if something happens to your
Right,
spouse?
right,
Or do you have somebody that's not in that traditional role? Do you have a significant other?
right.
Are you just, hoping that your kids can step in and do that, right? So I think it's invaluable, especially since the fact that we have no idea what can happen in the future.
And okay, so let's talk a little bit about somebody making those decisions, but also people change over time, right? You write an estate plan, and mom and dad are both of sound mind and body, and then all of a sudden, mom starts having some issues. You have to evaluate things. If they don't start before, and now they're coming in, how frequent are you dealing with people with, let's say, declining mental capacity? And what are some of the issues related to children trying to take care of their parents? On one hand, you don't want to be seen as stealing their estate. On the other hand, you want mom and dad to get proper protection. That's a difficult line to cross when you have siblings, maybe siblings that aren't on good terms with you.
Right. Right. And what I like to do, I like to uh, package it this way for my clients, right? And I try to explain to them, well, let's say we did nothing, right? What's going to happen, right? And God forbid if we have a situation where, these clients do have that mental decline and now they need somebody to step in for them. Well, unfortunately, if we don't have something in place, now guess what? Kids are going to have to go to, here in Florida, guardianship court, which, if you can imagine, that's added costs to the estate, time. In the meantime, now mom and dad, they need help, right? And we waiting for this to get resolved in the courts, dwindling down their estate. So I try to tell people, if we can package things in a way to make things as smooth and seamless as possible, if the need arises, why not take that opportunity?
Famous case here now in California, Jay Leno, really beloved, very successful by any standard, must have had more attorneys than the rest of us have tissues in our lives. And unfortunately, his wife is mentally incompetent, and they didn't have a plan that allowed him to make certain health decisions. And he has to end up going to court to get conservatorship in place for her to make some of these difficult decisions. And it's heart wrenching because here's a guy who's very beloved, and yet all that's public. All the more so for the average person, right? Because he's Jay Leno. He's probably used to photographers and all that. But I know people go through conservatorship court in California, guardianship court in Florida, you want to avoid that at all costs, and I think that's a challenge. Now, do you get involved in I know there's different laws in California than Florida as far as competency. When you meet with somebody and there's some question as their competency, not they're fully incompetent, but you just notice there's a little bit of hesitation, there's a little bit of they didn't quite get it, you're not really sure, or maybe they changed. How do you handle that process? Do you need to get a specialist to make declarations? Are you able as an attorney to make your own assessment, and does that stick?
So yes, we can make our own assessments as attorneys, right? And really, the threshold that we're looking at when in these situations is whether or not these people have testamentary capacity, right? And so that's really a question of whether or not these individuals understand what they own, and really who are the fruits of their bounty, so to speak, right? So who's meant to receive these things, or where would they go? And so that's a general idea of it, but it's a very, if you can imagine, it's a very, very low threshold. As long
Mm,
as we can figure out those things and those are fine on the day of signing, we're good to go.
right.
Um, but I try to urge people as much as I can, get these things in place before you see these signs, right?
Mm,
Because then we don't have to question it. We know you're of
right.
sound mind and
Mm,
body.
right. And get them done properly ahead of time rather than try to do it on your own and then piece. And that's where I find people get caught up as they knew mom was declining, as they threw together some sort of a will. And in California, we have certain laws and how it has to get done. And I know in Florida as well. And so now you don't have the document that you think protected what you thought was going to happen. And now it's in front of you and too late. So famous movie about Florida, Will's Body Heat. I don't know if you saw that, probably a little before your time, but it was a great movie, drama, love interest and all that. But about a will that was not done properly. And because of that, then they die intestate. The money all goes to the bad woman. So definitely worth those interested in watching. Okay, so that's estate planning. So that's ideal. That's building the barn and taking care of the cows before they get out. Probate administration, at least for the most part, to me, seems like you didn't plan ahead, or somebody didn't, and now you got to figure out what to do with it. So talk a little bit about, when do people typically come to you about probate administration, and what's the most common problem that they're coming to you to help solve?
Well, typically I see folks come to me after their loved one has passed away, and now, for instance, they want to sell mom and dad's home, and they realize after getting a realtor that unfortunately, they can't do that until after the probate process is completed, and so um, for that, of course, it's an initial shock for them, right? They're already grieving as it is, and now they probably have plans for this property, whether it's to provide some sort of financial alleviation or some sort of closure of some kind. But now that's going to be prolonged depending on the rest of the estate and what needs to be done.
Right. How much? I guess there's no easy number to answer. So let me rephrase the question. Um, I get phone calls. I'm sure you do too. You must. Gee, I'm the brother, and my brother's cheating me. My sister's cheating me, and I'm entitled to X, and I got Y, or they're not responding, replying. I want to, litigate. And I know in California, the litigation attorneys I talk to say it's probably going to cost you about $100,000. Like there better be enough in the estate to cover that being worthwhile for you to pursue, as well as for the attorney to get paid. Um, how costly is litigation when you want to argue at the point in probate court? Obviously, the better thing is get an attorney to help you make your case to the party and resolve things. The best war is the one that's not fought. But if you have to fight, what's that look like in Florida and litigation? Do you handle litigation, or is that something that you refer out?
So these days, my firm refers out litigation matters. Um, but back in the days when I did litigate matters, I would probably lean on the side of what one of your colleagues were saying, right? You're going to want to make sure that there's enough assets in there to make sense, right? So, for instance, years and years ago, while I was working at a different firm, we were handling a probate matter, a contested probate matter, and we had eventually billed the client, like I want to say 20 some odd $1,000, and we hadn't even gotten to the heart of the probate yet, or heart of
Right,
the litigation, and that
right,
same goes that's on the same vein as all litigated matters, right?
right.
If you need to make sure I would recommend, if you're going to litigate something, one, make sure that there's enough assets to satisfy attorney's fees and make you comfortable at the end of the day. And two, um, to make sure that it's something more than just for the principle of the matter, right? Although we may feel vindicated at the end of the day, if you have $100,000 bill at the end, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot, unfortunately.
I have a client who has a claim, I think valid based on what I've seen. Not an attorney, but again, I looked at the deeds and such. Certainly for the property, for an estate worth could be $50, $100 million. And he didn't have the money to really finance the litigation, and was shopping around for an attorney to take the case. And it was very hard to find one. And he had to do a lot of the work himself just to keep moving the ball forward. And he did. And I asked him the day, and he said, it's been like a job. Like, he could have he's paid himself $100,000 a year in lost income, but he's not counting his expenses. So sometimes you see people who are successful doing things on their own to supplement. It still costs you money. In his case, he had a wife who's able to support him, and he's moved this ball forward, but very expensive, very difficult to do. So the goal is obviously to avoid that. You're in probate administration, and let me just back up a little bit and say, most attorneys I meet are either probate administrators or litigators. It's very rare for somebody to do both. In fact, almost always when they say they do both, they have a firm and one does administration and one does litigation. I just don't meet attorneys who really do both very often. And I think that's probably my preferred approach, just for whatever that's worth. But when you do probate administration, inevitably, you can be the nicest, cleanest guy in the world, and yet you often get this sibling who's just upset or difficult. And on one hand, they're entitled to do what they want to do. On the other hand, you don't want them to lawyer up and make a big lawsuit out of it. So how do you handle those difficult siblings and difficult relatives, or maybe even hire an attorney? What is it that you do to try to mitigate the costs and limit the liability and the problems?
Well, it's certainly a strong consideration to take into mind, right? Because it happens, right? Whether that sibling had beef with the parents or the siblings are disharmonious amongst each other. But really, it's having a conversation with your client, and having them understand, okay, well, here are their rights, right? As long as we are making sure we're doing our job as needed under the law, we shouldn't have an issue. And I say it shouldn't. And typically that's how it plays out, right? The siblings, they might be upset, but they're getting what they're entitled to under the law. And then in the unfortunate event that they do want to litigate and sue, well, in my case, that's the opportunity for my client to go engage a litigation attorney, to meet that head on. But in my experience, typically we're able to push forward after everybody understands, okay, everything's on the up and up. Everybody's doing their job according to the law.
And I think you also, just to unpack a little bit what you said in the beginning, it's like that extra phone call makes such a big difference. One more phone call. I just find, people call me and say, the attorney never called me back. And it's like, I get we're all busy, but one phone call is going to save your customer mountains of stress and problems and such. And so I do think I try to remind myself of that as well, just to make that one extra call gives me better service and such. Let's take just a quick break and do some housekeeping, make sure everybody knows where we're at. This is Probate Weekly. It's a podcast we do every week where we go into probate issues. I interview probate experts across the country, attorneys, vendors, real estate agents. It's live. It's pre-recorded. We broadcast it on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. We also have a Facebook group, and after the call, you can always join the conversation. Additionally, if you have probate-related or state-related content, love to have you posted here. We have over 4,000 members, and we're always interested in more content. Want to help you build your business. Kevin has a great podcast on trust and estates that he posts people there, and I've actually interviewed some of the people he's put on the call as well. People ask for referrals for attorneys and realtors across the country. So I'd love to have you join our Facebook group, Probate Weekly. And if you want to see this podcast, you go to probateweekly.com, put your email in. It's optional to put your phone number in. You don't have to, but this way you'll get email reminders and or text with the upcoming episodes that come out. If you scroll down, you'll see us on various audio formats as well as past episodes on YouTube. And again, today we're really excited to have as our guest, Jamy Barreau, who is Barreau Legal PLLC. I'm sure it's very important distinction there. From Port St. Lucie, Florida, which is the east side of Florida, I guess between Jupiter and Vero, up on that part of the. I live in South Florida. Everything north was a space coast, so I'm not really sure where Port Lucie is. Somewhere up there, on the way to Jacksonville, I think. And on his website, he has his phone number as well as a contact us button, and then also he has a book that came out. It's got great reviews. Peace of Mind. Piece by Piece, Crafting Your Estate Plan. You can get it on Amazon on Kindle, but hot tip, if you go to his website and you scroll down to the Contact Us in the email, you'll get a free copy via email link. So if you want to both contact him, have questions regarding estate planning or probate issues in the state of Florida or Minnesota or Washington, D.C., put your contact information in and you'll get a copy of the book. Otherwise, you can pay on Kindle. I guess it's $14.99. Nothing wrong with that, making some money. But hot tip, you can get it for free as well. Hopefully, Jamie, I'm not giving away your kid's college education fund by giving away the book there.
No, it's quite all right. And really, my goal in the book was to spread as much, good information as possible, right? It was born off of my view of a lot of misinformation that's being spewed out on social media as it pertains to estate planning. So my goal is to get as much good information out there and kind of combat the bad.
And that's always been you from the beginning. I remember I met you. I think I saw you either on LinkedIn or Facebook, and you were answering questions and you were sharing information. And I thought, wow, this guy is like really, committed to helping people. I've tried to be the same way personally. I try to, all my lead generation is really education and connecting people. And I think if I help them get better outcomes, the business takes care of itself. And it has for me. I have to say I've been blessed in that regard. And I see with Jamie, like I said, I met Jamie. He had just launched, I think, his own practice. And then I believe in talking to you, you just celebrated your third year as your own law firm. So congratulations. And it's been exciting to watch you grow from a young guy who was like a teacher, like part-time working for a firm, to now you're like all that in a bag of chips.
Well, I try.
Yeah, he dresses up all lawyerly now. I even recognize him. So now we've been with, I think it's the second or third episode you've done for us. I really appreciate your willingness. So let's kind of continue the conversation as we go through the finer points of your practice. Trust administration. People think, well, it sounds so easy. Mom and dad did this trust and we thought everything through. We have a crystal ball. We imagine every problem, and I'm now the trust administrator, and I'm going to just fill out some paperwork and be on my way. I find that most people with, when I say substantial trust, $1 million or more trust, just as a number, it's almost like a part-time job bordering on full-time job if there's any kind of contest or complicated assets. So describe a little bit, how do you help out in trust administration?
Well, first and foremost, I try to tell folks all the time, right? Trust administration, at least here in Florida, it's not required to have an attorney, right? But it sure does make your job a lot easier if you do, right? And so some of the things that we need to take care of in the trust administration realm is, especially if someone's passed away and now, the successor trustee is taking on, we need to make sure that final tax returns are taken care of and filed. We need to make sure that any outstanding bills are paid. We've got to make sure we gather up all of the assets, right? So making sure that, during we'll call them the test data, the trust creator's lifetime, it was properly funded, or if it wasn't, what steps do we need to do to make sure it's properly in the trust? Notifying beneficiaries, because here in Florida we have special rules on what information beneficiaries are allowed to receive. So there's a multitude of things that need to be steps that need to be taken, and you can just alleviate some of that burden if you have someone professional and experienced to help you.
And in my experience, the one thing that will take people from 0 to 60 chasing, litigating or contesting trust issues is not lack of communication. And I know in California, there's certain statutory requirements that you are required to give certain notices to certain types of people. Maybe you're a son, but you've been written out of the will. You deserve to be notified of that in California, for example. And if you don't notify them of that, you really create liability for the estate. It's not just that you create more work for yourself, but the heirs could possibly hold you accountable financially for not doing the job. And so it's hard if you don't know the job you're supposed to do, it's hard to do it well or properly. And so much, again, it's the extra phone call, the extra filing, the extra paperwork, but not too much. So talk about a little bit in Florida. When somebody has a trust, they have errors. There's errors and there's, I guess, presumptive errors, or I'm not sure what you call children, because the children can be written out of the trust. So what are the documentation or notice requirements when there's a trust? Who is required to at least get noticed, and what are the basic things they're allowed to be told about?
Well, typically it's the qualified beneficiaries, and typically that's the folks that are set to immediately inherit, right? So we're not talking about like contingents and things like that, but the folks that are set on that day after parents pass away, for instance, to inherit. And that's a general idea of it. And really, they're entitled to a copy of the trust document, right? Um, and they're entitled to certain things like accountings and such things of that nature. So the basic idea is they got to know what they're going to get, um, and that they're going to get it right. And from there, really, it's making sure that we can administer, gather up the assets, make sure we dot all T's, cross all I's, and finalize things so that we can make a final distribution at the end of the day.
I find that's the hard part for people who aren't attorneys is the notices, who's entitled to what, giving them the information that they're entitled to. In some cases, not giving them information they're not entitled to, and that's the main reason to get an attorney. If there's enough assets to dispute over, somebody's going to dispute it. That's just maybe that's California. I don't know Florida as well as that, but somebody's going to dispute it. And the other one is having the right vendors. Getting tax returns done. And this is about the second time you've mentioned that. Most trustees who aren't professional don't know who to go to for that. And the average person doing their taxes really isn't set up to do those trusts. Not that they're that difficult, but there are some different requirements. Talk a little bit about who do you use and why do you use those particular vendors?
Oh, so I do have some accountants and financial planners close to me that I typically use, and usually I use them simply because they know what they're talking about. They've delivered good results, and I know they'll treat my clients right. And so while I know there are practitioners, attorneys who do take on those roles as well, my training and background isn't really there, right? More so, my tax training is more so on the planning side, making sure that we can shelter high net worth estates from estate tax liability at the end of the day. So I think it's a good idea to team with a team of professionals that can hit the ground running, right? So I'm a firm believer of that saying, jack of all trades, master of none, right? I'm a firm believer, stay in your lane and everything's gonna get done.
Yeah, I think not only stay in your lane, I also feel like the more central to your lane you are, kind of the easier business is, the more satisfied your customers are, the more people trust you because you're adding value. When you get out of that lane, and like I said, I had a family trust, and a family member was handling things, and she complained like this is like a job. I said, yeah, that's why I said we should hire somebody to do this because it is, it's a job. It's paperwork. It's forms. It's working with vendors. It's not glamorous. I mean, I don't mean to put your business down. We all have parts of our job that are some administrative, and yet if you do it wrong, it becomes drama. You don't want drama. You want results. So okay. So that's trust administration. Let's talk a little bit about Medicaid planning. Now, in California, Medicaid is a federal program. We have Medicare, which all seniors are entitled to, 65 or over. Medicaid is a means tested, think of lower income, but the people who plan properly and have paid taxes and are otherwise entitled to Medicaid. Now, in California, we call our Medicaid, because it's state administered, Medi-Cal. So you might be familiar with the product other than Medi-Cal. So in Florida, what's the product called? Is it Medicaid or is there a state name for it? And what kind of planning are you doing to avoid or to benefit from for your client?
Well, we do call it Medicaid. And really, the name of the game for helping folks qualify for it is just making sure that their assets on paper appear to be under the limits that are established by the government, right? And so, it's funny because the first time I was introduced to this concept, I got a little nervous. Like I thought,
Hmm.
what are we shifting money to the Cayman Islands or something,
Yeah.
or hiding it under our pillows? But really, no, right? The law is built out so that it allows us these opportunities to take advantage, and say, hey, government, I'm going to shift my assets over here. Um, in the way that you told me I could, so that
Right.
I can qualify. So, for
Right.
instance, right, some of the tools that we might use here in Florida include like an irrevocable trust. Um, a personal services contract is a pretty strong tool that we use here, and really the goal is to make sure that on paper it appears that assets are out of the control of our clients, right? And if it's out of our control, then the Medicaid office isn't going to count it against us.
And so the client has the opportunity to receive certain benefits, primarily care for elderly is a primary, I think, use of this, as with some sort of a nursing home or adult facility, memory facility, and there's certain benefits you can get in Medicaid that are tested based on the assets, right? And I think, I know when, like you, when I first heard about it, I thought, oh, well, there's just rich people ripping off the system. But the rich people paid all the taxes in the first place. So on one hand, it's a way of them saving a little bit of the tax benefit they paid for. And now that I'm getting older, I more agree with. It's funny how when
Well,
you're the recipient, you go, wow, it makes sense to me.
right.
But in fairness, I think that you shouldn't think of it as being some sort of slimy attorney trick, but the law is written this way. And if your government didn't agree, they change the law. This isn't a secret. And you're not doing anything that's secretive. You're taught this in law school. You're taught this at some sort of conferences and such. So it's public information, but it's way to maximize, I think, your planning and helping people get the best care as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And really I would add too, right? What I like about the fact that we have these carve outs in the law, and the reason I like them so much is, yes, it seems to on its face benefit very, very low income individuals. Um, but when I think about, maybe the middle class individuals, middle class families, and the impact long-term care can have on them,
Yeah.
and the impact it could have for generations to come,
Right.
I'm grateful that we have these tools. But I just, urge everyone to make sure you have a plan in place so that your family can take advantage of those if the time ever arrives.
The quality of life for people who take advantage of this is much better than the people who are stuck financially and then have a miserable experience of a family member caring for them or something else that just doesn't really give them the best experience. And so definitely it's an opportunity. And like I said, if somebody thinks the law is unfair, run for Congress and change the law. I'm not sure I would argue with you, but I'm not on that particular soapbox today. And the law is written this way. And certainly more wealthy people pay a lot more taxes. So let's talk about VA benefit planning. I imagine it's the same thing. Are VA benefits means tested at some point, or they're taxable? And this is something I never heard of before, actually. You're the first one I've even heard of this concept. What is VA benefit planning about?
Well, just very basically, the idea is, there may be some benefits that our service members are entitled to, and there may be situations where we need to shift their assets, similar to long-term care planning. We may need to shift their assets around to make sure that they can benefit from these. So it's really very similar, in a similar vein. Um, but what made me want to pursue that the most is I'm just so grateful for the service, that our servicemen and women do, and any little piece that I can do to show them, hey, I'm happy to work with you, and see what we can do to make sure you have better quality of life. Please let me help.
Wow, that's what I feel the same way. I grew up really anti-military, and I married a woman who her father was a retired Colonel Air Force, and came to appreciate military life, military families, the sacrifices they make. And along the way, we've kind of adopted a family that was serving in Manila, and then they were serving in Germany and helping with the kids and all that, and came to appreciate. And so today, I'm actually the vice chair of the Beverly Hills Navy Council. trying to help my friend who's the chairman of that group, helping Navy, in particular, service members. So I'm on board as well. So I saw that. I thought, well, let's make sure we get a shout out for VA benefits. And more importantly, I think, again, those people paid the price to be of service. Even if they are wealthy, let's plan and benefit the most they can for the work they did for us and the service they did for us. So thank you so much for that. And then special needs, I know there's a wide variety of what special needs means, but talk a little bit the more generic kind of cases. What kinds of cases do people come to you that have special needs that require some special planning?
Well, something that really comes to mind, and in a similar vein to the long-term Medicaid planning, is, individuals who are receiving some sort of governmental benefit, um, but they're going to get some sort of windfall, and they need to protect that. Or perhaps, in more recently, I've dealt with families who, wanted to do some planning and make sure that, let's say, their son with special needs can benefit from their estate, but they didn't want to take away any benefits, government benefits, this special needs individual child was
Okay.
going to receive. So in those
Right.
instances, what we would do is we would carve out special types of trusts, a supplemental needs trust, where we can funnel that inheritance into that trust. And then, this individual, the special needs individual, isn't having direct control, which then does not interfere with them receiving their benefits, but they can still have, access and benefit to those. It's just not in a direct fashion.
I have a good friend who, also a service member, who, you look at him and think he's pretty modest, but they have a house they own and they have a second rental property they own, and they've adopted two kids, both special needs. And you think about, is this a gimmick to, because they're going to inherit, money that most people aren't going to inherit, but their lives are so expensive, and while raising these kids, the parents have sacrificed so much financially. They didn't go on certain vacations, they didn't buy certain luxuries because they had to provide for certain caregivers or certain, I forget the term, but they have people who walk with them and take care of them and those things. Very expensive life to have special needs children. And so even if you're wealthy, the thought is, well, when I'm not around and not earning more income, how do we maximize what I do have for the rest of their life? And I think most parents with special needs want their children to be as normal as they can, or as prolonged, or as integrated a life as they can. And so again, I think it's one of those things where it's easy kind of to look down that. But I would say if you know anybody with special needs, that proper planning is really important, because you don't want them to lose benefits because of your income, but you want them to have that windfall, and you want to protect it and make sure whatever they get goes as far as possible. So again, it's important. And I think it seems to be a growing segment. I saw some statistics on autism, how it's grown like 50 times. Like in my lifetime, children from when I was a kid to today, it's like 50 times more common, just that one aspect, and so many other types that are difficult. So thanks for offering special needs planning in Florida and Minnesota and Washington, D.C. So let's take a step back now. We talked about the practice areas. Let's talk about the business, because again, you launched your firm 3 years ago. And so, we have people on the phone right on the call today who are going to watch this, who are building their practice, maybe in real estate or related business, or attorneys. Talk about, business development. How much of it, in the old days, my father was an old-fashioned attorney. You weren't allowed to advertise. They certainly didn't have Facebook ads then. If you did a good job, more people came to you. You were the attorney in the neighborhood and the city or whatever. But I don't think that's not our business today. Our business environment. Most attorneys have to do some kind of business development. So, talk a little bit about what percentage of your day is developing business versus handling the business that you have.
Yeah, well, I'd like to say, I have to admit I don't really keep track, but I would say maybe a third of the day at least, right? Because I try to devote my time to networking, to engaging on social media. If you can imagine, social media is a pretty big way of reaching and
Yeah.
communicating our expertise. So making sure that we can have different things like informationals online for them in and so, and also, for instance, once a month now, I've been putting on a webinar series, um, inviting folks to come, free webinars, so that we can discuss estate planning and answer any questions the audience might have. So I'd say a good chunk of time is devoted to it, but I think it's absolutely necessary.
Well, how did I not know about your webinar series? How do people find out about the webinar series?
Well, yeah, sign up for our mailing list. So
Okay.
we send out a monthly newsletter, and it will keep you updated and posted on, what's coming up. Um, you'll also, of course, get a copy of our our estate planning book, and we'll give you links for, articles on helpful topics, like our article or our theme this past month was incapacity planning, right? And I
Mm.
had a number of articles giving some great tidbits on incapacity planning, and then of course you'll have a link to whatever webinar series we're taking care of that month.
Fantastic. Well, we'll look at that myself as soon as I'm off the call here with you now. So Jamy Barreau from Port St. Lucie, Florida, on the East Coast, somewhere north of Boca Raton on the way towards Jacksonville, but covering the state of Florida as well as Minnesota and Washington, D.C. It's always a pleasure talking to you. I really appreciate your willingness to give and to educate. Thanks for helping me on this podcast. Thanks for helping everybody who's watched the podcast over the last couple of years.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm always happy to chat.
And for the rest of you watching, if you want more, again, Barreau Legal is the website. BLEGALFL is the website. If you want to go for more information, Barreau Legal. And on there, you can hit a contact us button. There's a phone number as well. Or the hot tip is the contact us button down below to get an email list, get a webinar, and you'll get a free copy of the ebook as well. So I'd love to have you join there. Again, this is Probate Weekly. We do this every week, as well as continue the conversation on our Facebook group live. We have about 4,000 people there. Love to have you post your content there. If you want to get reminders for Probate Weekly, go to probateweekly.com. Put in your email address. You don't have to put in your phone number. You're welcome to if you want text, email reminders as well. But we're also in other audio formats, as well as the past episodes on YouTube. So again, thank you to our guest today, Jamy, and for the rest of you. Hope you like this, like it, put some comments in, put topics for future consideration, subscribe if you're so inclined. As always, I'm Matt Bill Gross Probate. Have a great week. Thanks so much, everybody.